Good morning to you. Good to be with you on this Thursday, June 25th. I hope you are well and having a great week. We've been enjoying some beautiful weather in Indianapolis, and hope that where you are joining in from, that you have had a encouraging and joy-filled week, regardless of what it is that has come up against you. We have been teaching through the Dignity and Worth of Person statement from the Free Methodist Church. It is part of our book of discipline, and I want to just jump right in. The sentence that we're up to says this: the Free Methodist Church was itself born out of a desire to stand against the evil of slavery, and we continue to recognize the sin of racism and oppose it in all its form. So there's two parts in this statement. One is our historical stance, and then two is our contemporary stance. I want to speak first about our historical stance. If you are Free Methodist, you probably are familiar with the history of how the Free Methodist Church started, but you may not be. And I know many of you also are not Free Methodist, which is great. Love to have you join in. But the Free Methodist Church was begun by Benjamin Titus Roberts. We abbreviate his name as B.T. Roberts. And he was a pastor, an ordained pastor with the Methodist Episcopal Church. And he came to this point where he was very troubled by the prevalence of holding slaves among the Methodist Episcopals. And he began speaking out against that, indicating that, you can't be a Christian and hold another person as a slave. And it didn't go well. It didn't go well when he started speaking forth and challenging the establishment, if you will. So he actually ended up becoming excommunicated from the Methodist Episcopals, and there were others who also followed suit with him. The Methodist Episcopal system, similar to Free Methodist system now, was an appointment system. And so there were several pastors who were denied appointments. They weren't given any churches to lead because of their stance on abolition. And so those individuals came together, and that is where the Free Methodist Church began out of. As Protestants, we have a history of standing up against things that we identify as wrong, and being bold in stating and standing on what it is that we know is correct scripturally. The word Protestant comes out of protest. Even in the word, you can see the word protest in there. And that's our history from the very beginnings of the split of the church from the Catholic and the protesters, the Protestants. And then we see that again with John Wesley as he boldly stepped into the fields to preach to the poor, and stepped away from his pulpit, away from the comforts and the luxurious places of worship where many, many people who desperately needed to hear the gospel would never come and might not even have been welcome. And so John Wesley stepped into those fields, and he talked about becoming vile and preaching to the masses in a place that they were. And his passion for bringing the truths of the gospel and the hopes of the gospel to people was larger than his reticence or lack of enjoyment for being out in the fields and away from his pulpit. And so then we just see this continuing history that B.T. Roberts then continues of standing up and saying, slavery is not okay. It is not scriptural. It is not something that Christians can embrace and participate in or even stand beside if we indeed call ourselves those who follow Jesus. And I think it's important that it isn't just that B.T. Roberts talks about that you can't hold slaves. He wanted to go one step further and say, I'm not just going to be quiet about it. So, there would have been a response of, well, if you don't agree with it, just don't do it yourself. But he said, you know what, it is so unconscionable, that I need to speak forth about it. And I think that's a really important model for us. It isn't just about, well, I'm not going to choose that behavior. I'm not going to act in that way. I'm not going to speak certain words. But this is so significant about our witness and our faith and our belief that we're going to stand up and talk about it, even if it doesn't pertain specifically to us. I want to share with you a poem that B.T. Roberts wrote. He actually gave it to his sister, and it's just a powerful poem about abolition. It says this. The title is "The Voice of a Female Slave. Am I not a woman and a sister? Though curly locks my head adorn, though darkly sable be my face, yet courses not within my veins the purple blood of Adam's race. Though with the invader's ruthless hand, from friends and home I'm torn away, to be a slave in Christian's land, deprived of freedom's genial ray. Though master's whip hath torn my back and made the crimson current flow in torrents down my quivering flesh, till death had almost eased my woe. Though tyrants' galling chains enclose my mangled limbs in dire embrace, though marks of bruises and of blows eternity can never efface. Yet have I not that form divine, which God to all mankind hath given? Is not that soul immortal mine, which ever must dwell in hell or heaven? Abides there not within my breast devotion, pure affection deep? Oppression's rod can never arrest those powers of soul that never sleep. As then a slave you'd others have to feel for you, deeply within your heart engrave, for me such feeling deep and true. And then he closes the note that he gave his sister that contained that poem. He said, "Dear sister, keep this as an amulet against the repulsion of that evil spirit of slavery." It's a powerful word of looking not only at the circumstances of the slave, but of the female slave, written in 1845. I think it's important that we hear the other part of that statement from the dignity and worth of persons. It isn't just about our history. We can't just stand on our history and expect that all is well because we have a wonderful history. We need to continue that today. And so again, what the statement says is that we continue to recognize the sin of racism and continue to oppose it in all its forms. And that's where maybe it gets a little bit messier, a little bit more challenging, and certainly a lot more contentious. It's one thing to embrace a history. It's a whole other thing to stand up, as B.T. Roberts did, and speak forth against things that are wrong. You know, I just read a history or a survey yesterday that looked at perceptions of Christians around this topic of racism. And I was a bit flabbergasted and honestly saddened by what I read. 2/5 of white Christians, practicing Christians, those who identify as today. That's not very many. 78%, compare that to 78% of Black practicing Christians today who say racism is an issue today. It made me think of going to a doctor. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you go and maybe your symptoms aren't super straightforward. And so you really are relying on a doctor really listening and hearing what it is that you say. And you can have one of two experiences, can't you? You can have one doctor who just kind of shoves you off, doesn't really listen and says, oh, here, take these antibiotics, I'm sure you'll be fine. Or you can have a doctor who really leans in and listens and pays attention and asks good questions. And when you leave his or her office, you feel like you've been heard. You feel like the doctor really tried to understand what it is that you were experiencing and really tried to care and respond. Well, I think as we think about that, as to how we respond to our Black and brown brothers and sisters, their experiences, their stories, their realities, we can be like that first doctor, just assuming we know what's going on, not really listening, and just saying, go away, or here's the quick answer, here's the quick response. But I myself really want to be like that second doctor, that doctor who leans in and listens and tries to understand and ask questions and really wants to have my brothers and sisters feel like they've been heard, feel like they have been cared for in listening to their experiences. And I think that's our calling today as Christians as well. As we close, I just want to share a couple quick passages from Scripture that really talk about our role, our responsibility, if you will, to stand up for others and to be those who stand alongside others who are struggling, who are experiencing pain, who are on the receiving end of injustice. So there's many, many ones that we could look at, but I just want to mention a couple. The first is Proverbs 31:8-9. Proverbs 31:8-9, it says, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Isaiah 1:17, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. I love and am challenged by Isaiah's words. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression. Psalm 82:3, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Ecclesiastes 4:10, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. I wonder if sometimes our brothers and sisters who are Black and brown perhaps might feel like that as they think about us as white Christians. Do they feel like sometimes they are alone and has not another to lift him up? Let us be those who do lift up our fellow brothers and sisters. And then just one more, James 1:27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God. I don't know, that's what I dream that my faith might be characterized by that description, pure and undefiled before God. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I think that is indeed a challenge, but it's a challenge that others have gone before with and have set a course and a path. And so may we all together ourselves be ones who stand up as the early Protestants did, the early protesters with Martin Luther. May we be ones like John Wesley who are willing to step outside of the norms of how things are done so that we might be a part of God's kingdom coming. May we be like B.T. Roberts who takes that challenge and honestly that potential personal risk to stand up against things that are wrong and speak forth about them. May we be, as Isaiah has called us to be, those who learn to do good, seek justice, and correct oppression. It's sad to me that the topics of racism and prejudice have become such a political topic. It's sad to me that simply declaring the truths from Scripture, that all are created in God's image, all are sons and daughters of God, and that any place in any way in any institution or system that oppresses a group of people, standing up and saying that is wrong, it saddens me that that has become so political. But regardless of its political overtones, we don't adhere to a certain political party. God doesn't belong to one political party or another. God calls us to stand with him and to be characterized by his calls for justice and righteousness. So may we step aside from those political overtones, those that might drag us one direction or the other, and stand firmly upon those values, those core values of God himself and of the kingdom that we are to be bringing here on earth as it is in heaven.